Hello everyone. We're going to have a great event now. I'm going to start introducing the wonderful creators of a new version of Dracula. I can start by introducing Sue Virtue, who is the amazing producer of such things as Sherlock. Too, like Copenhagen, The Victor and Diddley, and back in the old days things like Mr. Bean, which I was saying earlier needs a Gatiss Moffat reimagining. Next, Stephen Moffat, the showrunner, creator of Sherlock and Copenhagen, as well as Press Gang, which was the show that made me want to be a journalist way more than All the President's Men. I just thought that was an incredibly well-resourced newspaper. Next, his co-writer Mark Gatiss, the actor, writer, League of Gentlemen, and now Dracula. And finally, last but not least, Place Bang, the actor. Mark recently described as looking like if Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi had a child. So we're going to start with a trailer, but I think Sue wants to say a few things.
Yeah, so this is our new trailer, which I think is going to go online later today. But I just wanted to say, in case there are any children or squeamish people, but bear in mind you're at the Bram Stoker Festival, I doubt it, then close your eyes for the next 40 seconds, I think, but otherwise enjoy it.
You're doing very well.
So, whose idea was this to do?
Bram Stoker. Know that here.
But where did you come aboard? I'm sure Bram didn't consult with you at the start.
Well, this is already becoming the story. It is settling down into the anecdote. We were making the third series of Sherlock. We were going to be shooting for a couple of days, and I had a photo on my phone of Benedict silhouetted against Mrs. Hudson's door with his collar up, and we had to come back to London for a do, and I showed it to Ben Stevenson, who's the head of drama, and I said, "Looks like Dracula, doesn't it?" He said, "Do you want to do it?" And that was years ago, and that's how it started, and it's been sort of gestating ever since. But we didn't obviously immediately make plans, because that was about 5 or 6 years ago.
When did you first discuss it? Like, how do you go from, because you're going from one incredibly mythic character to another. Is this the future now? You're gonna find another mythic character next?
No, I think we should stop because I know that's. It looks like a career plan. It honestly isn't. No, that was kind of a joke back for ages, and I think Mark and I have to find things to discuss on the train that people won't listen to. We started discussing Sherlock because we couldn't talk about Doctor Who because people listened to us. And then we ended up unable to talk about Sherlock Holmes. So we could talk about Dracula because we like Dracula. There was a certain point where we realised that beyond a joke, actually we did have something that might be quite useful and good and interesting to do with it. So we pitched it to Sue. So it wasn't just the photograph of Benedict, but that's the best story. It's the best story because then Benedict doesn't get the part of the story.
So basically, then I took them out for lunch and got them to talk about it, and then we did pitch it properly to the BBC. And so
how does it resolve into a pitch? Like, do you start with a scene or an image or a bit from the book? Like, what was it about Dracula that you felt, okay, this is a bit we can do something with?
I think what we said, if I'm remembering right, was this is the best leading man role ever and he's unencumbered by heroism or morality. You know, he's got everything. He's tall, dark, and handsome. He's got he's got a sort of melancholy backstory. He's got powers, and he's evil. You know, that's it's his one advantage over James Bond. You know,
Is that how they pitched it to you?
it wasn't something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, and then it was pitched around America. We talked to various people as well, like Netflix and Amazon, and the pitch was pretty solid by then, I think, wasn't it? It changed a bit when we went to China.
Yes. We only this year when we were in production, we had to go to China to try and pitch it, and literally discovered that there are some things that Chinese broadcasters don't like. Sex, the supernatural. What was the other one? It was probably bats or something like that.
Gore.
Yeah,
Sex,
gore.
the supernatural, and gore.
Yeah.
We figured out we've got one shot of a handsome cab. That was about it. They also said things like, what was it? We were saying it's a new take on Dracula, and they're going, Dracula?
And we might have some problem with vampires, I think.
Yeah, he absolutely is such an incredibly well-known, iconic character, and you absolutely assume, and yet it was like us going and saying we've got this great new idea, we're going to modernise Sherlock Holmes. Great, who's Sherlock Holmes? And you suddenly realise that your take is not exactly a take.
I'm really curious, how do you pitch Dracula without the supernatural or sex? Like, is it he's a small business owner?
It was a short visit.
How do you pitch it?
Short visit. We'll see.
We just persevered. Well, sorry, but and onward.
So there are so many versions, and I'm kind of, obviously it's intimidating. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe when you come up with your idea, you're just like, no one's done this before. But of all, like, for you, Claes, coming into it, like, how many of the versions of Dracula were circling around in your head, or do you have to shut all that out?
No, I actually watched all of them to see if I could steal bits and bobs here or there. And I did steal bits and bobs here and there. No, for inspiration, I watched everything. I've never actually, I have to be quite honest and say, I've never been really a huge Dracula or horror fan in that sense, actually. But, and actually when they approached me and said, we want to do Dracula, I was like, does the world need one more? And then what sort of turned me round was the writing. I mean, this whole new take that Stephen and Mark have on this, with what they've written here, and we can't really say too much about it because we're going to give too much away. But there's stuff in
Keep
here.
asking anyway.
Yeah. But there's so many great things, and it might be a bit. I had a little bit the feeling that every other Dracula that I'd seen before this was slightly, your cartoonish, two-dimensional, blood-sucking. But here, I really felt that Stephen and Mark, with what they've written, he became three-dimensional, and he became, if not a person, then at least a creature that you could sort of, not only just, you could actually sort of, I've tried to find stuff that you can actually relate to or identify with. Because otherwise I couldn't. I need to internalize that. Otherwise it'll just be like playing the idea of Dracula, and that will not work for me.
Because the thing about this version, from what I've gathered from other interviews with you, is that he's kind of the protagonist. He's not, and I think in most versions he's the antagonist. Is this correct?
Well, he's still the bad guy. Let's be
Yeah.
clear. We haven't sentimentalized him at all. But we set ourselves what sounded like a thrilling challenge to say, let's not keep him in the shadows. Let's actually have him as the main character. Now, as you know, even in the novel, he kind of isn't. He's lurking in the shadows. He's making fantastic appearances in this glorious Hammer movies with Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee must have done 4 or 5 days' work in each of those movies. He's hardly in them. I mean, he's amazing when he is, but he's the creature that lunges from the dark. So we had the idea, let's put Dracula center stage. And dear God, that was difficult.
Easier said than done.
I mean, trying to work out, how do you talk when you're Dracula? How do you have a conversation? What are you like over time if you're not just going, ah? What did you say before that? What's your small talk?
Because more than just.
He does that as well.
He does that a lot.
But it's, and that, for a while, this was dreadful for a while. We were working separately and together, and we were both saying, I'm just avoiding Dracula.
But when it started to become, they were starting to become like sort of late Hammer films in which they do anything but have Dracula in it. He'll come on in a bit, definitely.
And so so trying to find a tone of voice that wasn't just smug and boastful like a Bond villain. You sort of realise why Bond villains don't come on till the end. Because they're boring. And they're sitting there with their monorail and their staff of people in overalls and their volcano.
Get so many people not
is
liking
boast
them.
for 10 minutes and then get blown up. So
you're going to do a Bond. That's what I'm doing.
yeah.
Well, we talk about that openly on trains, hoping someone will listen to it. Nothing ever happens.
No, nothing's happened. No, so to actually have him talk, and then when we, I think we, after a long time, we started texting each other lines he might say, and try and make him, at the same time as he was scary. Sometimes he's clever, because he's a very, very clever man. He can be insightful and wise. He appreciates beauty. He appreciates likes human beings in much the same way a wine connoisseur likes wine. He's picky about them. And then we found a tone of voice that we liked, and then we couldn't shut him up. It was great once we got a way for him to talk.
It's really interesting though, because inevitably by pulling him out of the shadows, you have to examine him in a different way. And as Claes was saying yesterday, 400 years of loneliness. And Christopher Lee was always very keen about the essential loneliness of the character. But if you literally just imagine what it's like to live in your castle and only go out at night, you would get bored. Of course you would. I mean, eternal life is inevitably a curse, not just in the Five Doctors. But it must be really hard. And so therefore you would acquire a love of good company, stimulating people who you then kill. Or perhaps you keep on for a bit because they're nice. It's very interesting as soon as you take him from being just an implacable force for evil, he necessarily has to become a cultured and interesting man, whilst never losing his essential inhumanity.
I'm really curious how you write stuff. I saw in my research, I saw an old interview with Sue where she talked about this, like from years ago, how when you were writing in the past, you'd walk around muttering and laughing to yourself. And in the interview said, I think he needs a writing partner. And I was kind of curious how the two of you work in something like when the idea is out there and it's really daunting. Let's make Dracula protagonist or put him at the centre of the stage. How do you actually work that out together?
We mutter at each other.
yeah, it's like that. Yes, and I still do the muttering and laughing to myself. I'm stuck with that forever. I don't really mind. What can I say? It's all right. It's all right if you're writing a comedy because you just look like a loony when you're talking. You burble away to yourself and giggle, and people just think, well, that person's harmless but mad. But if you're writing Doctor Who or Dracula, you're saying things like, I shall seethe in the darkness, Doctor! and people are frightened of you.
Which he did once at an airport, actually.
I moved myself into a corner and I was writing Doctor Who. And I thought I was on my own, and I was doing the whole thing, the shadows shall rise. and when I got up, I finally folded away my laptop, I looked around and there was a guy sitting behind me, and he was like that. Anyway, you actually asked about how we work together. We do every variant. On this one, we go off and we take sort of modules of plot off to, separately and write for a while. But we'd always get together and spend very, very happy, entertaining days laughing our socks off writing together.
And also on this one, because by total coincidence, we filmed at Bray Studios, and we had an office, a fantastically plain office, which we could do nothing in but work next to the loo. We thought, at first we thought, oh, people are sort of going to come to our office quite a lot, and they were just like queuing to go to the toilet, which is just the back of it. But we ended up, going down to the set and then being able to come up and work on the episodes as we were making them. So it was a very efficient sort of office job for a while.
Also, I've got it cracked as well because neither of them drive, so I send them on a holiday somewhere at a hotel in the middle of nowhere. And and they can't get out, and they just feel guilty, but they just write all week.
That's great.
Is procrastination an issue? Like, are there kind of just tricky bits that you've got to write, and you go, oh, let's just do that another day, until she sends you off to a hotel and you have to...
That's a good idea. Yes, I think the only solution to procrastination is that we are sent to an expensive hotel. Now that you pointed out, you said it. There we go. Yes, I'm procrastinating right now. If only I could be shaken out of it.
Keep grabbing this mic. So when you actually come up with an idea of who your Dracula is, like, how was Claes cast, and what was the process there?
It was. We have to mention Kate Rhodes James, our very, very brilliant casting director, who deserves, frankly, all the credit. But she sent through the first list of people she thought were interesting for Dracula, having read the first couple of scripts. And she'd circled Claes's name or something, said, I think this guy is really interesting. So I went and looked at the clip from the Square that she suggested I look at. And, you know, she said, oh, bloody hell. That's it right there, for God's sake. And Sue was just coming home, and I said, look at this guy. It's going to be this guy. And I emailed you, and you said, oh, for God's sake. So we all, at that point, just thought it should be Claes. But we had the problem that Claes couldn't come and meet us, because the Americans had taken his passport from him. Claes, explain.
No, what happened? Well, it's not entirely true.
Already
I was shooting another film in Italy when I was actually supposed to come over, but then I didn't have the time, and then I went back to Denmark for a bit, but I had to go. Right after that, I had to go to the States to shoot a show for Showtime called The Affair, and in order to go there, you need a visa and all that. So you go to the embassy, they take your passport. So I couldn't go and visit you guys for a casting, so they came over.
What you should have done is you should have been shipped over in some sort of crate.
No, I'm already thinking we should adjust this story.
Yeah.
He arranged some papers and he arrived in Purfleet. There were 50 boxes, we didn't know which one Claes was in.
That's right. That's how it happened. Yeah, no.
But
No,
it's an
so
sorry.
they were so nice. They came over to Copenhagen to see me, and we did the casting there. And
But it's worth saying, one of our favourite versions is the 1977 Louis Jourdan, Frank Finlay one, brilliant adaptation, and we took quite a lot of things from that, but maybe principally the idea of Dracula being not British. And although Louis Jourdan is actually extremely French in that, what he mostly is other. And we thought, even though we had a huge list of possible Draculas, we were definitely looking for someone who was not British and had a different quality to him. So, and then the two things just kind of came together in Claes straight away. I mean, as you say, you look at the Square and just go, but there's Dracula. Also, there's James Bond. But that's another story.
You need to have that overheard on a train as well. Just you kind of moved on to the idea of the different iterations of Dracula. Aren't there versions that you either went, we definitely don't want to do that, or there's bits you kind of, there's a huge mythology to pick and choose from. So as an actor and as writers and as a producer, were there bits where you went, we definitely want to do that? Or we definitely, and I know you're careful not to give things away, but I'm sure there's ways to answer this.
Well, obviously, the Louis Jourdan version is superb. If you haven't seen it, you must. It's really terrific. And it's the most faithful to the book.
I think we're amongst friends here.
Yes. But, and Christopher Lee is utterly brilliant as the sort of shark version of Dracula. There's not a hint of remorse or anything behind those eyes other than a desire to kill you and drink your blood. He's genuinely terrifying. But the lesser known Dracula. I mean, the thing I keep referencing at the moment, because have you all seen the Frank Langella version of Dracula? Yes. Yeah. Isn't his cape removal amazing? When you said that scene where he walks in and he takes his cape off and hands it to Sylvester McCoy. It's, if you haven't seen that, go and look at Frank Langella removing his cape on his first arrival in that film. It's astounding. I've freeze-framed my way through it. I can't see how he does it. It's extraordinary.
But it's similar in a way to Sherlock Holmes in that we sort of regarded everything as canonical. So it's not just the story or the stories, as it were, it's all the versions, and you look at things and think, actually someone's been in this room before, thinking, how do we do the fangs, how do we do the eyes, how do we do the cape? But there are some brilliant, clever decisions. Gerald Savory does a very clever thing in an extremely faithful version of merging two characters, because there are sort of too many suitors for Lucy, and stuff like that. It's just sort of, it's clever work, you know. And then in terms of the appearance or the style or Dracula's kind of, what he's like as a personality, there are so many variations. We didn't sort of look at any and just shake your head. Apart from Lon Chaney Jr., obviously, but that's a different story. But the big ones are obviously a Hammer and the Louis Jourdain one, I think. And Lugosi obviously is such an iconic look. There's a bit, we could probably say in episode 2, where Dracula is in full evening dress, where we literally put in the script the full Lugosi, because it's sort of, he even has a medallion. It's irresistible. It's like, well, no one's actually done it for so long. It's rather nice to do things like that.
Is it more like, so I'm kind of going, there's a spectrum of fun to intimidating about all those versions, and it sounds like you were on the fun end, at least by the time you finished. Were there versions of Dracula that you were kind of particularly looking at? Or do you have to?
No, but I think it's right what Stephen says. It's like there's a lot that really works in a lot of them. I mean, that sort of sharky thing with Christopher Lee is amazing. I think the Lugosi has that otherness that you're talking about, that very sort of weird quality. Then I really like the Klaus Kinski one, because I thought, I mean, when we talked about this lonely sort of feeling of, you know, November evening, 1728, do I bother to get out of bed today? I'm not really sure why. It's only just a very skinny peasant girl from Romania. I'm not gonna go and eat her. I mean, no, that was not very nice. Sorry about that. I thought the loneliness that Kinski sort of gets, I mean, in that character was quite interesting. So I thought there were really great stuff in all of them, actually. There's something quite animalistic about the Gary Oldman one, in a way, and I like that too. So that everything sort of worked as an inspiration, I'd say. And also, I suppose, because you have written this character so much more three-dimensional than he's been before, so you can actually take all these bits and try and fit them in there.
As a producer, do you have to kind of, when they come to you with like this, like a load of stuff, is part of your job going, that's going to work, you can't do that, that's...
No, I didn't watch quite as many versions as they did, to be honest with you. I mean, I think what we got more involved in as well was the look and things like the teeth, and we had long conversations about what the teeth should be like, and we worked with an amazing prosthetics couple, called the Elsies, who actually live in LA now, about and they're just, well, their company's called Eagle Studios, so it's
They paid us, I think.
yeah, I know, they really did. But it was things like, you know, because the original idea of the teeth was to be sort of a...
It was like a lamprey.
Yeah.
We had it was like, what can we do that's different? I thought maybe Dracula's fangs could be like like those awful deep sea fish, have like a circle of fangs. It was really horrible. You know, you see them sort of stuck on the side of plate glass, and we sort of did some designs, and it's actually really horrible, but you do also want your Dracula to look really handsome and dashing. He looked absolutely ghastly. So you end up with a sort of, in the end, we went for sort of slight extensions of Clace's teeth, and it's a slightly reassuring thing of feeling like a lot of people have had this discussion before, and it's remarkable how often you end up with the same sort of decisions being made about, you know, how heavy is the cloak and how much do the contact lenses hurt. And it seems to be all that Christopher Lee ever talked about.
How heavy was the cloak?
It weighed what I weigh, I'd say. Ish. I had myself on my back.
Like a demon on your back.
Yes. It looked really good. We had to trim it a little bit.
You also made a documentary, In Search of
Yes.
Dracula, which is going to be on soon on BBC.
It'll be on around the time of the drama. Yeah.
So you went through all the different versions. Tell me a
Yeah,
little
it's
bit
like a
about
dose of salt. Yeah, it was lovely. It's been weird. I literally finished today. That's why I'm wearing the same suit as I wear in the documentary. It's been the longest documentary I've ever made because it's been little bits and pieces since February. And it was a really good suit for Slovakia. And then it was a less good suit in London in July. And now it's coming into its own again because it's chilly again. Yeah, it's just essentially a history of Dracula from novel to stage to screen and all the different versions.
So doing the documentary, like, did you get to meet lots and lots of people who've been involved in those reproductions? Like you met the brides.
Yes, it's interesting. It's very bride heavy. We didn't get any Draculas. Sadly, Louis Jourdan only recently died. Frank Langella said no, and Gary Oldman said no. I got an email from him. He was very sweet. He said, "It's very kind of you to ask, but it's a very dark period of my life, and I don't want to go back there." So that's interesting. But so it's quite interesting to come at it from other people's perspective rather than the characters themselves. But it was interesting how often the same sort of things recurred. I interviewed Susan Penhaligon about the Louis Jourdan one, and there's a lot about how serious people take it, and I think that's an awful lot to do with the fact that maybe the perception of it as a sort of and obviously an iconic character, but also like as Clay says, you have to believe in it, and I was very glad to get Martin Jarvis from Taste the Blood of Dracula, because he wrote in his autobiography this very telling anecdote about they were only young and they were all sort of messing around and they were slightly rolling their eyes waiting for Christopher Lee, the great man, to arrive, and then he says, I watched him fill up with Dracula. It's never left me that. I remember talking to Claes about that on the first time we met. It's like, and that's how to do it. You know, if you actually let in doubt, you can't stride around in that cloak and feel like you're 400 years old and you can do anything. You have to believe in it, and therefore you have to find your own truth, don't you?
Definitely, I think. I mean, because in that sense, it's slightly heightened. It's like a character that's so over the top, you know, and it's like, so you have to, I mean, and we were looking, you know, to do that thing I mean, it's just a classic Dracula move, but it's like, if it's just something that's there and it's not really, it doesn't come from anything, and all of a sudden it was there in a scene, it was like, it just seemed right. I mean, so you look for these things, but you need to sort of find a way of them to sort of come from some place, so it's not just an empty gesture, but it actually has content to it. And that was absolutely the challenge here, I think. Is in that sense, it's like I've never been out of my element and out of my comfort zone like I have been on this one. Because I mean, I'm 500 years old. I'm just living off blood. I don't ever go out in daylight. It's like there's so much of it that you can't relate to it. So you have to translate it and make it into something you can actually internalize and embody somehow.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was wondering too. Like every time you reinvent a character, every time people reinvent a character like Dracula, you've got that tricky line between pantomime stuff that's overly familiar and trying to make it real again. Was that like part of the process of you figuring out how do we make this real?
The thing that you find out, I think, is that you cannot take that pantomime thing totally out of it, because it's sort of the magic of it. It has. The whole world has that. It has to have that. Otherwise, it's not. And I've only ever done stuff, you know, in little art house films that are very sort of realistic, and I've never done anything like this. So I was. But you just find out you can't just go about it as if it was just like, you know, a Mike Leigh drama or Ken Loach.
That could be interesting too, though.
No, I mean,
Ken Loach is Dracula.
I mean, you have there has. Oh fuck! Did I say something?
No, that's good.
No, but I mean, you need to go. You need that sort of heightened element. You need that magic. You need it is other, and it is otherworldly, and you need to try and find that. But in order for me to sort of stay alive in there and not die, I need it to be rooted somewhere, because otherwise it'll just feel empty, and that's really difficult. So we spend a lot of time doing that.
I think it's crucial, and you know, it's like that for anything fantastical. I think you that's something, you know, like pretentious about, you know, what's my motivation, but But it all has to come from somewhere. And if you do put yourself in the mindset of an immortal, you have to think through the consequences. Otherwise, it is just sort of play acting, isn't it? But what we spent an awful lot of time was on the rules of the beast, the rules of the vampire, and with all that lore and all those films is, as I said this yesterday, but Dracula is simultaneously almost omnipotent and vulnerable to absolutely everything. So you actually have to make a decision what to chuck out, because otherwise it's sort of there's no real jeopardy if we can.
Can you tell us what you
appear
did
as-
there?
Well, several Hammer films in, you wonder why Christopher Lee is willing to leave his castle. You think, oh no, sparrows. Yes, you leave out stuff. But I mean, going back to the thing about what you're saying about, is it pantomime? Is it therefore funny? Well, no, not really. If you do it straight, you do it real, you do it properly. And if you allow the fact that Dracula is sensible to the fact that he is in a sense a preposterous figure, is happy to make the joke himself, it's fine. But you've also got to keep in mind that people want the treats associated with Dracula. They want to see a scary castle. They want bats flying around the place. You bet he swirl his cape in front of the moonlight at some point. People love those things. They don't hate them. They love them. It's like when we did our radical version of Sherlock Holmes by updating it. But he better bloody well wear the hat, and he better live in Baker Street, and all those things that people expect and want and love. Doesn't mean, if Dracula can be winsome and funny one moment and snap your neck the next, he's all the more frightening.
I wanted to ask about humour actually, because you both started off writing very funny things. And
Are you saying they're not funny now?
Stop
Is
A long, slow decline.
Sorry, we're not being entertaining.
I was going to wrap this up. It's a bit like Sherlock is very funny, and your Doctor Who is very funny. So the role of humour in drama, I think is really important. I get bored of drama that doesn't have humour in it, so I presume there's humour in it.
There's a lot. It's very funny.
And I was kind of wondering why you think, because there's some people who do dramas where everything is just deadly serious.
It's a false distinction.
Yeah,
Wrong, those people.
It is a false distinction. It's like it's like you're talking to an audience who doesn't know what real life is like. Real life is always composed of farcical situations and high drama, all at the same time. Things are happy, sad. That's what life is like, and drama should be like that. So it doesn't have to just be one thing or the other. Some of the best, most famous comedies are deeply bleak. In fact, most of the best ones have a bleak soul, and they're about trapped people who, like Steptoe and Son or Porridge. The actual essential thing, even Dad's Army, which looks superficially like a sort of great laugh, is against the backdrop of the worst conflict in history, and has its darker moments. And simultaneously, a lot of straight drama has wonderful moments of lightness to it. So, but we were determined. I mean, the biggest decision about making Dracula into the protagonist is that he has to be, as I'm already coining, a more fully rounded human being. And that means he has to have a sense of humour, because he would, after he's seen absolutely everything. He'd sit out Brexit, because it's like, well, Constantinople was like this. And we've made him funny because he is a funny man. But he, as Stephen says, I think some of the best stuff in it is just deeply chilling, because he has that sort of thing of, like, you imagine a torturer might say to you, very, like, kindly say, I need to take this leg off. It's not going to be very nice, but it's for your own good. And there's something creepy has crept into it, hasn't it?
I'm sorry, the knife's cold. But I think it's you two are obviously very funny, and you've come from comedy. I think it does make it easier.
From?
No. But I mean, your background. I think it's easier to put comedy into drama than it is for somebody who's never come from the comedy side.
Well, it arises in a way, I think, quite naturally, especially if the business of slaughtering people and drinking their blood, having chatted to them for a while, is just Dracula's normal day. He can't go around being, seething with drama about it. It's how he has a conversation. It goes on for a bit. Anyway, thanks for coming round. Bare your neck, love. It can't be a huge moment of drama for him. And as he does, he says in the show that he likes people. He just, likes them slightly too much. If Dracula likes you, it's a huge compliment because he's got great taste, but it is your last compliment.
You mentioned earlier when you were on, you have to talk about specific things when you're on the train because things could end up on Twitter about what's happening in Sherlock or whatever. And obviously Dracula is beloved. A lot of people know who Dracula is apart from the Chinese. I'm kind of curious about the new relationship that creators have with the internet and social media and blogs, and how that affects.
I've never heard of the internet.
Anyone want
You
to tell
should
me?
have no relationship with it at all, is the correct. If you want a focus group, get a focus group. If you want some audience research, get some audience research. Don't go on Twitter. Right? That's like listening to an overhearing a conversation among drunks in a pub where they're showing off to each other about how scandalized they are about something or other. It's just pub chat. If you want audience research, don't go online. That's all.
However, from a producer's point of view, I think we use social media and Twitter and Instagram and everything to get to the audiences that aren't watching live TV and aren't watching what's coming up next. I think that's really important now because most people aren't watching live now. They're watching they watch catch up, for instance. And so to find those people, I think you've got to go and see what they're doing.
Well, if you're saying really, the point is that obviously there are lots of people who love it, and as Sherlock Holmes or Doctor Who or James Bond or whatever, all these iconic characters. I keep trying to say James Bond. Barbara. You have to. We are them too. So, but there's no point in just making the same version. There's absolutely no point. And Dracula is replete with different radical versions. And as with Sherlock Holmes or whatever, you can have different favourites. And the exciting thing for us was to do our version. So you can't please everyone all the time, and nor should you try to please everyone all the time. But you just have to have faith in your vision and enjoy yourself, really. So that's what we're trying to do.
But I think actually, at one point, sort of realising, okay, we're actually taking on something really iconic here, and so many people will have an opinion about it. But it was actually, at one point, it got quite liberating to sort of just know, wow, I mean, there'll be so many expectations, so to try and live up to all of them is just impossible. So let's just try and stick with what we've got here and just really see that through and stick with our idea and our take on it. And normally, I mean, on the day shooting, you never think about it. It's more sort of when you wake up at night and you go, whoa. What did we shoot yesterday? Oh my God, that's going to go terribly wrong. But on the day, doing the stuff, I mean, it's you just really shoot the scene that's written. So.
And we were saying really that you've got to make the show that you want to watch yourselves. And in the same way that Sherlock, you had this fear that you were going to make a show, and what happens if you yourself didn't like it at the end, because you're such fans. And I think the same thing with Dracula. In the end, you've got to make the true version of the show that you would like to watch yourselves. I think, being fans.
You mentioned kind of the new audience of people who don't watch on terrestrial telly anymore, and this is a co-production BBC Netflix. Does that change anything in terms of how you make it, or is it just a new stream of funding?
No, it hasn't really changed how we make it at all, actually. It just had more money, which actually you need now. That's the thing. You couldn't make this without it.
It's an absolute. You look at something like The Night Manager. Production values are astonishing. The movie production value. People expect that now from telly. It's very hard, isn't it? With there's so many great, huge, glossy things coming along. It's no wonder that people are. High-end television is sort of where storytelling has gone, because it's less and less about films. It seems that people love a big unfolding narrative. It's this strange afterlife. Talk about Dracula. Strange afterlife for projects like his Dark Materials. They really fucked the film up, and so it's like, no, we can do it again. And The Dark Crystal. Who would have thought it? I mean, after all these years, I'm hanging out for Come Back, Mrs. Noah. No one left. these extraordinary things are happening, and it's often to do with people who loved something when they were a child going, let's do that again, you know, so we have form.
They're also, like, you're using the same format, the hour and a half length, which is kind of film length. Why is that format something you kind of gravitated towards? So it's 3 episodes that are an hour and a half each, isn't it? Why is that? Because it's an unusual format. I think Endeavour does as well. There aren't that many shows that do.
It was handed to us for Sherlock, actually, because we piloted Sherlock as an ordinary hour-long show, and it had a success with, what was it,
Holiday, yeah.
With doing 90 minutes.
390s, yeah.
So I remember Sue pulled us out for Doctor Who, reading through the 2 of us, and said, look, the BBC will green light it if you agree to do it as 390 minutes. Do you want to go and think about that? And we looked at each other and said, no, just say yes. But don't you want to think what you do with it? No, just say yes. So for that reason, we're still doing it. I think there's a lot to be said for it, actually. You can do a lot of plot and you can do a lot of character, and they don't crash against each other the way it can be the case in an hour-long show or a 45-minute show.
The other thing, just you mentioned Doctor Who and obviously Sherlock, like, this is, again, very, very mythic character. Are there similarities, differences to the challenges with something like Dracula? Like, again, you're taking something that loads and loads of people know versions of.
It wasn't ever a career intent just to go around doing that. But, you know, we suffer from a fanish tendency. So if someone says you might get to do Doctor Who, oh yes, thank you, or Sherlock Holmes or Dracula, that sounds brilliant fun. It's not. It's very different doing Dracula. It's very, very different. For the reason we're talking about earlier, is I had not appreciated the extent to which all stories are sort of morality plays. All stories are about morality. You know, they're all little moral thought experiments. What would you do if? How would you react if? What is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do, and what are the consequences of doing the right or wrong thing? So one day you start writing Dracula and realise he doesn't give a fuck. Right? So how do you make that work?
across America. But then that becomes its own inverse thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Then it's a different kind of morality tale. It's about the person who doesn't.
And then the other thing about horror, right, is there's always like and all the different versions of Dracula, there's like different subtexts, and horror tends to speak to the anxieties of the time. I was kind of curious, and again, this might be giving stuff away, but are there kind of Victorian anxieties in Dracula that you feel are still part of what we feel?
I don't think it's not our job to do that. It's someone in the future goes, isn't that interesting? And I mean, you can look at lots of literature or films now and go, that's interesting. I mean, I think the Twilight, vampires always come back. They are the most persistent myth, which I think is really interesting. There's something very deep in our culture about that, about something feeding off you in a sort of parasitic way. And it has become so many. Dracula has so many faces reflecting different things. And the Twilight thing was a very sort of millennial version, where they sort of be like vegetarian vampires, and they're all sort of teenage and kind. It's not right. And we just thought, it really is time for Dracula to be a tall, dark, stunningly handsome,
Does he spark?
bad man, and with laboratories and waistcoats and castles, because the wheel turns and it's time for high Gothic again. So I don't think you can really apply things like that to your own stuff, because it doesn't work like that. It's like, let's make this one about capitalism. Let's make this one about fear of foreign invasion. You can find these things in any literature, but it's not for us to say. I think it's for historians to judge.
I think there's an ancient thing that we will always be in fear of, and an idea that troubles us is that evil might be really seductive. If evil's really nasty, then you think, and repulsive and horrible, it's easy to hate evil if evil behaves hatefully or horribly, or is ugly or grotesque. What if evil is incredibly attractive? Do you have the strength of character to resist?
Place is coming out of this very well, isn't it? He has all the best tunes.
I think we can take some questions from the audience.
So you did Doctor Who, you did Sherlock Holmes, now doing Dracula. Do you feel that you're being guided by Peter Cushing? Peter Cushing.
I hope so.
You'll have to find a James Bond connection with Peter Cushing. And that's how you
There must be something, wasn't there? That's a nice idea.
Peter Cushing isn't a real Doctor Who, is he?
Tell about your aborted storyline for the day of the
Yes, I tried to get Peter Cushing into the 50th anniversary Doctor Who special by having it revealed for the first time in Doctor Who's universe. It was made into a film starring Peter Cushing, and they tried to withdraw those films from circulation, but they keep turning up on bank holidays on television. I put it in the book version, but we weren't allowed to use them. Doctor Who was not allowed to use the posters of the Doctor Who movies. We couldn't get the copyright. It's an outrage.
I'm presuming this is a nerdy enough audience to know that.
How many of you were really
Cushing-
bored by that? Sorry. No more Doctor Who.
Peter
No more
Cushing
Doctor Who.
was in the film version of Doctor Who, is not quite canonical, right? So we'll take another question.
Hi, this isn't necessarily a question, but you probably remember a few years ago there was another version of Dracula done, I think with Sky, was it? I won't mention the Irish actor who was involved with it, but because Bram Stoker and Dracula is so close to the Irish people, because Bram Stoker, obviously he was living in Clontarf, which is only down the road from me, but it's very, very close to our hearts. And when this particular version came out, I remember a lot of us, we were so excited about it, you know, but after a couple of episodes, it just died. It was just disheartening, it was.
That's not going to happen here.
No, that's the thing.
Don't worry.
Because
Don't worry.
oh no, we
And
know
if you're
because
bored after 2, you only have to sit through one
absolutely
more.
no. Because I remember when I'm a massive Sherlock Holmes fan, read all the books, all the old movies, saw all the old movies, and when my friend here told me about the new version of Sherlock, I was very hesitant about watching it. But when I actually watched it, I was completely blown away with the whole thing, the writing, everything. So when I heard that you guys were doing a version of Dracula, I just knew it was going to be in safe hands and it was going to be spectacular. Obviously we haven't seen it, but judging by the clip alone, I think we know it's going to be brilliant. Look forward to it, by the way.
You may come again.
You've obviously spoken a lot about the influences from like other Dracula films on this series. Would there be any kind of horror films outside of like the Dracula like mythos that would have had an influence on the series as well?
Well, without giving too much away, episode 2 has a lot to do with the Demeter and Dracula's voyage to England, which we sort of pitched as the thing on a sailing ship. So that certainly has an influence. I mean, there's a lot of great scares in this, I think, and some really quite odd, disturbing stuff. But I mean, it's filtered through so many horror influences that aren't outside of Dracula, just horror in general, I suppose, you know. But it's been really interesting to sort of plough that furrow, and not necessarily just the Dracula one. You think about there's a lot of haunted house sorts of scares, really, aren't there? And a lot of creeping menace, and yeah, all of them.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say I really love your work and everything you've done. Mark especially, I still... there's a reason for this. It's not especially, it's more of like Mark, I just wanted to say that me and my brother still quote the kidnapper sketch to each other to this day, and we love it. So my question actually kind of comes from my 6-year-old cousin. So when I was 10, I had my birthday party at the Bram Stoker Museum because I was cool. And there was a Dracula expert guy, and she, all of 6 years old, asked a question which she wasn't able to get an answer to. So I hope you guys can answer this question. What happens if a vampire bites you on the bum?
Please.
I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you.
Cool, that's the answer. So.
Your description of your take on Dracula sounds quite similar to Brian Fuller discussing his take on Hannibal, who ironically is played by another great Danish actor. So, have you seen the NBC Hannibal? Would you think that was fair? And is there something about Danish actors that makes them particularly good at inhabiting amoral heroes?
Yes, that's all we learn at drums. That's the only thing that's on the schedule. No, I think it must be quite coincidental that Mass has done that thing. But obviously there is sort of something there. There's a familiarity. I mean, he eats all of the person, doesn't he?
You know, I think Dracula is a big influence on Lecter, particularly in the first two books, because he's actually very shadowy. As in the Silence of the Lambs, the film, it's about 13 minutes of screen time. It's actually not very much. It's a similar sort of thing, and actually, by the time you get to Hannibal, he is, I think, explicitly Dracula-like. There's a bit in the movie when he goes round to Ray Liotta's house, and an Alsatian comes out and then just backs away, and I was thinking, what, he's Dracula now? So I think it's possibly the back of Thomas Harris's head, definitely.
Hi. When you were developing this version of Dracula and you were looking at what you could do with it, did you ever consider, even for a moment, updating it to modern times, or did you always think it's going to be Victorian, that's where it should be set?
It's not our default condition just to randomly update things. There was the reason we did it with Sherlock is because we thought, and I think correctly, that although everybody thought the Victorian setting was really important to Sherlock Holmes, it wasn't important at all. And the truth is, everyone talked endlessly about the updating up until they saw it, and then 5 minutes after that, no one ever mentioned it was updated again, because it's just Sherlock Holmes. The setting isn't that important in Sherlock Holmes. But there are things about Dracula where, you want the castles, you want the bats, you want the cape, the stuff that you're only going to get back in the day. So no, we didn't. We were, as I said, we're not just randomly updating all Victorian characters. Well, we might.
I just remember when we were doing Sherlock and we did the special, the Victorian one, and the question people started asking, well, how will you be able to do that without the use of phones and things like that? It just went totally the other way around.
Hi, is there a Van Helsing to your Dracula?
Well, there will always be an equivalent to Van Helsing around somewhere, but we're not telling the whole plot in advance. Discovered that's a mistake. You'll find what we're kind of doing is we're not claiming this to be the most faithful adaptation, although it's faithful to the beats of the novel. It takes some of the ideas from the book that haven't been used before. We've rearranged things quite a lot, and characters turn up in unexpected ways. But there's a lot of the characters from the book there, and there's always going to be somebody like Van Helsing or Father Sandor, as in which one's that? That's Dracula, Prince of Darkness, played by wonderful Andrew Keir. So you'll find that.
Sue Virtue, I want to be you when I grow up. Don't care about the lads. Sorry, lads. The question I have is about, you talked about for Place the idea of this character being very lonely, but in the books he does have a small family of vampire brides who I'm kind of obsessed with. Do they appear in your version of Dracula? Or can you tell me?
Yes, they do. Dracula is a man who remains lonely even when he has 3 wives. It's a measure of entitlement never equaled in human history.
Dracula in the Me Too era is a kind of interesting prospect.
Hi, you talked about how it was kind of easy to a point to find your Dracula in Place. Was it just as easy or harder to find Mina, to cast her?
Mina?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm just remembering casting Mina. We saw a lot of brilliant Minas. It was absolutely terrifying casting Mina. A selection of fantastic actresses came in, and it's never been so difficult. They all learned the part. They all kind of acted their socks off. It was terrifyingly difficult. It's the truth. But the one we've got, Moffat, is amazing, absolutely amazing.
And we also, John Heffernan, who's playing Jonathan Harker, came in to read with, I think, the last three. So we did it like that, sort of chemistry read, as it were. And we did a big scene between them. So, but yeah, Moffat's fantastic. I think she's just in a new horror film. Edgar Wright was tweeting about it yesterday. But he says she's like the new Carrie. So that's quite good timing.
There's someone up here.
Why these microphones actually seem to make people speak quieter. It's a new invention.
Hi, my question is primarily for Stephen and Mark. Obviously people's writing styles clash in general everywhere they didn't, but I find that my writing style as an actor as well as a writer clashes with my friend who is just a writer. So I was wondering if you often have clashes or rarely, and if you do, then how do you get through them? And, yeah.
Absolutely never. I mean, that's the honest truth. We've never managed to sustain any level of disagreement. I remember once thinking, I read one of the Sunday Market and I thought, I didn't agree with the bit. I thought, maybe this is when we're going to disagree. And I said it to him and he said, "Nah, I know what you mean." So no, we're very, very, very happy working together. We sync like iPhones. I mean, it's, no.
Not like my iPhone. I'm having problems with mine.
If you have an up-to-date iPhone, isn't it?
My phone is so out. I've got a brand new one, and it refuses to recognise my old one. It's mostly a landline. So it's not working.
Well, do you work with someone and you clash with them a lot?
Yeah, he's just I feel bad saying this, but he's just a writer, so it's fine.
He's just a writer. All right. Me too.
I wonder.
I am beginning to see the source of your clash. Maybe the next time you talk to him, don't say, "But you're just a writer." Or as bad as that fellow over there.
Or as a producer, don't say to the writers, "It's easy enough to write."
Actually,
The thing I always get is, it's easy for you to write that. Oh, fucking idiot.
Does being an actor change the dynamic? Like having an actor in the process, does it change the dynamic for you, right?
Well, I don't have to pay something down muttering. I just do it in my head. I mean, the great thrill is being able to change lines on the day without having to consult him. Just go, I don't think I'd say that today. It's really hard to learn.
I forgot to mention that you were in this. You were in this. What is your role in this?
I play Mycroft Holmes. We thought we'd get this sort of, why did we get that out of the way straight away? They would say, why can't Dracula and Charlotte meet? We just thought we'd get it out of the way. So that would come out. No. I can't tell you who I play. I'd like to, but I can't.
Sherlock and Dracula are Victorian in the source material. Is there any modern writers or any modern books that you are fanning over at the moment that you'd like to adapt?
The Time Traveller's Wife, which I'm currently doing for HBO. So there's that. Generally speaking, I mean, I was about to say no, and then it was pointed out to me.
You forgot about this big HBO.
What about you, Mark?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm trying to read a lot more new stuff. I read a lot of non-fiction. I just read a brilliant book called This Is Going to Hurt by Alan Kay, about Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor. I mean, it's brilliantly funny. It could be adapted, except it's... maybe they are, yeah. It's fantastic. It's so depressing. It's just about how, what we demand of our health service and our health practitioners is just astonishing. And when you see it, when you go, if you ever are lucky enough to go to hospital and go, you obviously expect that the person knows what they're doing. And then you realise, it's a bit like when we were kids and you only look back now and think that supply teacher was about 12. and you look at doctors and you don't realise, because of the coat and the stethoscope, that they're just going, I haven't got a clue. And I'm about to deliver your baby, sir.
There's someone here with a
I have two questions, one to follow up to another. I think since the Coppola film, everyone's become very fond of the idea of Vlad Tepes, the Imperator, is Dracula. Is that sort of present here, or is it just like, not really, no?
I tell you, we couldn't afford this, but I do, in the documentary, I go to Dublin today, and Philadelphia, and Slovakia. I did want to go to Romania, to stand outside Castle Bran, just to say, it's all bollocks. And let's do a kind of quick whip back to England. Because it is. Oddly enough, it all comes from that 70s documentary In Search of Dracula. That obviously was of Vlad Tepes, and Stoker found the reference in the book in the Whitby Library, and you can clearly see he just went, oh, that's cool. And he changed the names, from Count Wampia to Count Dracula. It's just so perfect. But that documentary from the 70s has essentially been mapped onto the history, so it's actually like that was Dracula. So I don't really think it's it's all fun and everything, but it's and it would be a terrible disservice to the remaining tourist industry. But it's not really true. The name is there, and there are certain things about putting Turks onto stakes and nailing people's turbans to their heads, which feel very Dracula-ish, and that's obviously the inspiration with the idea of him being this warlord. But in terms of it actually being the real thing, then because there are no such things as vampire.
Oh no! I mean, it's become
apparently.
It's become very. Whenever they're like, oh, let's do the origin. It's just like, let's literally make him Vlad the Impaler becoming a vampire, or very like him. My follow-up question is, how does Dracula say his name in this? Does he say Dracula, or does he say Dracula?
We were hoping we were going to call it Dracula. So that retrospectively all children would be right. And then we're going to do Frankenstein. He says Dracula, don't you, Clay? Say Dracula.
No. That would be giving it away. He does it in various ways. I mean, he's very good at blending in, so he'll do it in your language if he wants to.
What advice would you give to a younger person who was trying to get into writing but doesn't really know where to start?
Sorry, say the last part again.
If someone who doesn't really know where to start getting into writing, what advice would you give?
Where to start? Sorry, where to start getting to write?
Where?
Getting into well, first write. Are you writing now?
Yeah.
Well, write a lot. That's honestly the big one. And try and get good at it. And in terms of how you get professionally involved, well, all the advice we can give you is about 32 years out of date, because
there's the BBC Writers' Room do quite a lot of things for new writers, and there's the BAFTA to the Rockcliffe, but otherwise write what you know and what you feel comfortable with, and either what you'd want to read or what you'd want to watch. I think don't write what you think somebody else might want to do.
And write and read, I would say. Read screenplays, read plays, read everything, but mostly just write. That's the difference. There's no such thing as a would-be writer. If you want to be a doctor, you have to train for 7 years. Or less, as I've discovered from reading. But if you want to write, you can start today, and it may not work out, and it may not actually be the fulfillment of your dreams, but you can just do it, and that's a marvelous thing, marvelously achievable thing. It's just a piece of paper and a pen.
Also, write for an audience. Make sure someone reads it. What kind of writing is it?
A lot of kind of comedy and.
But is it screenplays or is it prose?
Yeah, screenplays, and I've done a few sketches and stuff.
Books I'd recommend would be William Goldman published some of his screenplays. You can order these easily on Amazon. And reading a William Goldman screenplay is a masterclass. They are better than the brilliant films that they were made into. His grasp of how to tell a story in screenplay format is, I think, unparalleled. No director lived up to what he wrote on the page. He's that good. Also, he wrote a couple of books called Adventures in the Screen Trade and Which Lie Did I Tell? Full of great, hilarious, readable anecdotes, but along the way, such nuggets of genius about storytelling that you will never forget them. So I'd recommend those books.
Also, the author of the most brilliant quote ever about writing and the business, which is nobody knows anything. So just, ignore all that.
That's someone up here.
Hi, so this question's for Stephen, and I'm a big fan of coupling, and I find all your work really funny, and obviously there's a lot of humour in your dramas. But I was wondering if you ever have the urge to go and just do a straight sitcom again.
I was having the urge the other day because I've just written something straightforwardly funny for the first time in years. I've written a stage play which is just funny, which we're hoping to get on. I can't really talk about that just now. So yes, I miss just the business of just being funny for the sheer hell of it. I don't think there's anything I enjoy more in terms of watching things. If someone tells me this is the greatest, most moving, most spiritually enlightening film you'll ever see, I'll get round to it in a month or so. If someone says you'll laugh your arse off, I'm watching it before the end of the sentence. I love laughing, and I love nothing more than successfully delivering a joke, or in my case through other people's mouths, obviously, but I love nothing more than laughter. I think it's brilliant. I think it's your brain and your body agreeing on absurdity. I think it's a wonderful thing.
So you have a history of writing like strong, iconic characters that are kind of already in the zeitgeist. So how do you differentiate one charming sociopath from another? Like, how do you make sure that Sherlock isn't in Dracula, and like a little bit of Doctor Who doesn't pop up in Sherlock, and you know, how do you make them their own people? Because you do a great job of it. Like, how does that, like, what's the process behind
we
it?
had a rule that, because we were both working on both Doctor Who and Sherlock at the same time, that where there were resemblances between those two characters, we just lived with it. Because a lot of Doctor Who grew out of Sherlock Holmes, that's a fact. The Edwardian superhero with the big brain. You couldn't ever shy away from the things that were in common. But I think Dracula's quite different.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes, you know, genuinely, if you're working on parallel projects, they do seep into each other. Sometimes people have to point that out because you haven't quite noticed the similarities. But actually, you know, Dracula doesn't solve crimes. Yet. Or does he? But no, I think they're quite distinct. I mean, there's sometimes the thing to watch out for is when you think, actually, no, that doesn't sound right in his mouth or her mouth. It's actually, there's something quite distinctive about that. And basically, the more you do of it, the more you know the actor's voice, it doesn't really come up in that way, does it?
It does actually. It occurs to me now, like once you've cast the character and you've got a very distinctive actor doing the role, does that change dialogue often? Like when you see someone's take?
Oh yeah. Well, but not in a purposeful way. It's just that once you've made the right casting choice, one of the ways in which you know you've made the right casting choice is you can't get the voice out of your head. From the moment you've said, yeah, that's the right one, the moment you say it's Clay's voice that you're writing, and you don't necessarily know how that's altering what you do. It's just fixed in your brain. That's who it is.
Also, Clace used to come to my room at night and tap on the window, like Danny Glick in Salem. So I get his voice out, man.
Mark would make me a nice little cup of tea.
And then you go home.
We'll take one more question.
Hi. It seems to me a lot of what you've been discussing is how to portray reality on screen, talking about villains being two-dimensional and trying to make Dracula a little bit more human, three-dimensional, and injecting comedy into drama. And I'm just wondering, is there some part of human behaviour or personality that's particularly difficult to write realistically?
No.
With Dracula, then, you know, as Steve said earlier, you're starting with a checklist of inhumanities, and so you have to, what we found very interesting and fun is the idea of putting Dracula in certain situations which maybe we've not seen before. And so we're sort of used to him at the end of a long table having a discussion with Jonathan Harker where he talks about his ancestry and the children of the night. But if you sort of imagine him what he'd be like having dinner with an elderly Grand Duchess, as he does in the show, and he's just full on charming. It's like a conversation between two European aristocrats and more, you know, things like that. That's been really interesting because you think, well, it's a new territory, and yet obviously at the back of it always is his desire to drink someone's blood. So he's extremely affable and charming, slightly cheeky and flirtatious, but it's all leading somewhere. And our challenge was to sort of make sure you don't just do that straight away, and you can enjoy that process. So yeah, I mean, it's not like there's a list of things you can and can't do, but that's part of the challenge of making him into a much more foregrounded character.
I think I've thought of a more sensible answer now. If you can't approach a character with the word hero or villain, you just can't. If you just write a villain, well, that's you not showing up for work. They are the hero of their own story, not the good guy of their own story. They are the world. They are behaving in a way that makes the world make sense to them. So you've got to be able to see the world from their point of view. Now that's tough when you're talking about Dracula, but consider what pigs think of us. We might be quite affectionate towards pigs. We might also like bacon sandwiches. They probably don't, if they were asked, have a very high opinion of us, right? So you think in those terms. You have to think in terms of what do they want, why do they think they deserve it, what are they going to do to get it, and what are their limits. If you think hero or villain, you are not showing up for work. It doesn't make sense.
Here, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks a million to the wonderful panel.